right, good morning. Thank you all for being here. This is a very exciting, it's our second annual Building an Artist Life event. I'm Erin Wheeler, I'm the Assistant Director of Career Development here at CCA. Over here is Kate Day, our Senior Director for Career Development, and our fabulous Career Development team, the rest of which are outside. We put together this event in response to a lot of alumni asking for sort of more information about launching careers, launching successful creative careers. And this has been a really fun year for us, and we've partnered with Chronicle Books to put together our lineup of speakers. Chronicle Books publishes an amazing array of products, and you'll get to hear from some of their editors and publishers later this afternoon, which we're really excited about. And Chronicle Books has also been the home to countless CCA students and alums over the years who've been interns, artists, writers, editors, kind of the whole gamut. So it's a really fun match for us to work with them. This year's program is also the first day of CCA's inaugural Alumni Weekend. And I encourage you to stick around and sort of check out more of the events on Saturday and Sunday. I'd like to quickly introduce Jessica, who will tell you a little bit more about this weekend and sort of its place as part of Alumni Weekend. Mm-hmm.
Good morning. My name is Jessica Russell, and I'm Director of Alumni Relations at CCA, and it's been a pleasure to talk to a lot of you this morning. And as Erin said, this is just the first of 3 days of an Alumni Weekend. And if you are interested and have not already signed up to come to Saturday and Sunday, grab a program, and it'll show you all the programming we have. Tomorrow, we have a full day of events in San Francisco, starting with registration starts at 9:30 a.m. We have breakfast, and then we have a full morning of workshops, everything from additional career development workshops. We're having an alum, Iris, who's actually here today, leading a wonderful career development workshop tomorrow, and you can read all about it in the program. We also have interactive programming with our new comic MFA program. You can go and draw your own comic. You can hear about the architecture program and meet the new director, industrial design program, tour the hybrid lab. Check out our new backlot. If you guys have not seen our new backlot, it is amazing. We have the entire back half that used to be the Greyhound Mechanics building is now full of really great bright orange containers that are going to have programming in them. So you guys can come. If you come tomorrow, you'll be one of the first groups to be able to check it out. We're having a taco truck lunch out there. And then the whole afternoon of programming, we're partnering with Undergraduate Fine Arts. They're doing the final weekend of the Soundwave 6 Biennial, which is an art and science biennial. So there's workshops all afternoon that have to do with sound and water and art and science. There's an exhibition in the evening. So anything you're interested in, there's going to be something for you tomorrow in San Francisco, and it's not too late to join us. And then Sunday, we're back in Oakland, and we'll be having a morning of programming from 9:30 a.m. to 1 p.m., where we're celebrating the history of the Oakland campus. There will be archival materials and lectures, opportunities to record your oral history of your time at CCA. We'll have open houses and hands-on activities in printmaking, ceramics, glass, and sculpture, tours of the campus. So it's a great way to reconnect with the Oakland campus, take a look at old memories, old pictures of Oakland, and reconnect with alums. So I hope if you're on the fence about coming for other days this weekend, I hope you decide to join us, and definitely come and find me and talk to me if you have any questions about the weekend. Thank you.
Great. So one of the other exciting projects you'll see kind of threaded out throughout the weekend is brought to us by the Collaborative for Institutional Inquiry. I'd like to introduce Erin, who will talk briefly about that and how you can sort of get involved during the breaks today and then also the rest of the weekend.
Hi everyone, my name is Aaron McKenzie. I'm an alum as well, graduated in 2010. So I work at the Center for Art and Public Life as the design strategist and in a new role as the institutional designer for the college. So part of what we do is we start these research projects that are kind of focused around engagement practices, so we get to good information from the alumni, and we've done a lot of work from the students, but we make them interesting and engaging, and they start tingling at your creative practice. So we have these little cards that we've handed out, these little 2 folds. They say alumni engagement on them. So you have kind of all day to fill those out. What I would suggest is we have a big board set up down there. We're asking everyone to create a graphic representation of their creative practice over a length of time, from leading up to CCA and then following it. In a lot of ways, it's an abstract exercise, but it's meant to get your mind spinning about where you've been and where you're headed as a creative practitioner. So I'd really love it if you were able to stop by and chat with us. My collaborative partner on this project is an artist named Chris Jajari. He's a sculptor and a highly acclaimed community engagement artist. Starting next year, he'll be the artist in residence at the DeYoung. He just did a show that closed at the Getty. So he knows what he's doing. I really encourage you to come down and chat with us. We'll be running this exercise today. We have another really fun one set up for tomorrow in San Francisco. So fill out your forms, because they're not hard questions, and they'll get you thinking about your role as an alum, as a wise old sage of creativity. And then come fill out our board, and I'll leave it at that.
All right, great.
Thank you.
Great. So before I get started, too, I want to thank one other important partner for this, which is Diesel Books. He'll be joining us this afternoon for our book sale table. They're also celebrating their 25th year in business this weekend, and they have a bunch of fun weekend events, too. So if you do find yourself back here on Sunday for alumni events, check out their party that's going on down the street as well. The agenda has short breaks built in between all of the talks, so you have a chance to kind of mingle and chat and sort of refresh yourself a little bit. And the lunch menu as well, as if you didn't get one, there's additional lunch menus downstairs. We have sort of a choose your own adventure for lunch today, so with a lot of recommendations of places in the neighborhood. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Meg is a freelance creative, serial entrepreneur, and mother of two. She's a prime example of just how nonlinear an education and career path can be. With an educational background in psychology, Asian American studies, business administration, and architecture, Meg has worked in art direction, writing, design, illustration, and prop styling. She's launched multiple successful ventures, including a wedding invitation company, a home accessories and stationery line, decor sample sales events, and she's the co-founder and current creative director of Anthology, a home and lifestyle print magazine. She's been featured in publications such as Sunset, Real Living, and Real Simple, served as a guest on radio programs and across media, and she's the author of 7 books and founded the Inc. Creative Business Series with Chronicle Books, which is why we're really excited to have her sort of kick off the day and this exciting lineup of programs. So, Meg, come on up.
Let me just get situated here. Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry, my voice is, oh, okay. Do I need to do anything?
Just pull your presentation up.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I forgot to get that before I
Yeah.
left the stage.
Yeah, no problem.
There you go.
All right.
Great.
And no, I just hit the down button? Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here to share my work with you all today. Like Erin mentioned, I am the creative director of Anthology magazine, and I'm also a freelance, I'm an author, and I'm a freelance writer, stylist, and designer for now. And I say, and I say for now because I never know what's in store for me around the corner, and that's something that I've learned to be comfortable with, and it wasn't always this way. Before I start getting into my whole talk, I kind of want to show you some of these books that I've been an author of. So this is the Inc. business series with Chronicle Books, and it all started with Craft Inc., which is at the far left. And that spawned all these other books. And I've been either author or co-author, at least of the first 4 books, and the 2 most recent books, Blog Inc. by Joy Cho and Lisa Congdon. Oh, no. And Lisa Congdon is the author of Art Inc., which just recently came out. And for those last 2 books, I served as editor. And I think maybe from, if there are any other future titles in this series, I would probably continue carrying on as the editor. And now let me show you Anthology magazine. So Anthology magazine is a magazine that I started with Anmin Lee in 2010. It is a home and lifestyle print magazine. It is sold worldwide. It has a circulation of about 12,000. And in addition to managing the overall visual direction of the magazine and of individual articles and stories, I work with a lot of freelancers, like photographers, stylists, designers, and illustrators. So as you can see from this, sort of what some of my current interests are, and I actually did not have these interests when I was younger. At an early age, I think we all start to form our identities like based off of certain labels. Maybe you were the athletic one, the artistic one, the smart one, the comedic one. And like these labels kind of help us to determine maybe what our path is going to be. Or in some cases, you might have people who kind of push you away from these paths and they tell you to go do something else, maybe something else that that might better help pay the bills. And in my family, my older brother was the artistic one, and I think because of that, I decided I was going to go in another direction, and I was going to be the smart one. And so my interests ended up being in math and history. And my brother's love of art wasn't necessarily supported by my family anyway, even though he won like a lot of competitions and that kind of thing. It was never viewed as something that would be like a viable career. And so when I was young, my brother's art like really set the standard for me. And I would remember like I would be really afraid to draw, and I would often do that like in private, and I'd draw something, and then I'd look at what he did, and I'd be like really upset with myself, and then I'd crumple it and I'd throw it away. And to this day, when I put like pencil to paper, I still have that anxiety. And that's something I'm going to touch on a little bit later, is that even though, and like now, I'm an illustrator, I've illustrated things, and it's funny, he's actually a police officer now. So we've kind of like changed roles in a way. What I'm going to touch on later is that our passions and interests may not necessarily feel good all of the time. Okay, let me flip my paper here. And so I think the prevailing thought for a lot of people, at least for me when I was growing up, is that we have like this leaning and an inclination towards the subject matter, and that we have some sort of calling in life, and a job or a career that we're meant to do. And I for the most of like my adult life, I felt like I was on this path to finding this true calling, whatever it is. And I believe that up until about 6 years ago. So let me just go back and tell you a little bit about my story. In high school, I was trying, like that year that you're trying to apply for college, I was trying to decide, what to major in, and I was trying to decide between psychology, architecture, and history, 3 very different things. And psychology ended up winning out. And in 1997, I was about to graduate from UCLA with a degree in psychology. I had specializations in business administration and Asian American studies. And there was a Filipino culture organization on campus, and we were planning our graduation ceremony. And I was at this meeting, and the organizer was asking the group, like, does anyone here want to design the programs? And no one raised their hand, and so I did. I don't know why I did, because I was like, why doesn't anyone want to do this, right? And so I raised my hand, and the guy was like, yeah, it'll be really easy. He showed me like these old programs, and they were pretty ugly. So I was like, I got this, right? Like, this should be easy. And he pointed me towards this computer, and he said, this is PageMaker, and that was like what it was called before it was InDesign. And he's like, this is what you're going to use. And, I was like, oh, this is great. And the thing is, I'd never used a graphic design program before. And so I went to the library, because that's what you did back in the day. There was, the internet was not very helpful at that time. And I would look through a bunch of graphic design books, and I was like really like charged by all the beauty I saw in the graphic design books. And I had all these like great ideas for putting together this like design, this graduation program. And I was kind of like wishing I wasn't graduating yet. And I wish like, oh my God, I wish I could go like get another degree. I wish I could get it in graphic design. And it was clearly too late to do this, because I was designing a graduation program. So then like I sat in front of the computer, and then I hit like a really big roadblock, and that is It was not really that easy and intuitive to use PageMaker. Like anybody who just like sits right in front of it and tries to teach themselves how to do this, it was really tough. And I cried and I was like, oh man, I should not, I'm about to graduate and I raised my hand to do this thing and I have other things I need to work on. In the end, I ended up putting together like a pretty nice graduation program. It ended up being like this booklet, and I got a lot of compliments from it. And then, it was not made in the most efficient way. It took me a long time. And the good news was I wasn't dismayed by any of the hurdles, and I felt really inspired by the end product and the validation I got. And so this was like the first step. This is my first step in sort of reinventing myself. It was the discovery of a new passion, and it ignited something inside of me. But like I said, it was followed quickly by frustration, and this happens for a lot of people. Like if you're learning like a new skill or an art, and it's just not turning out the way that you had planned, and it's not making you feel the way that you should, it's important to kind of step back and just sort of take some time away from it and return back to it and like work through these tough times. When a lot of writers, designers, and artists, like when they take their first stabs at doing anything, it's actually not really pretty initially, and it takes a lot of iterations, edits, and layers before it looks like something that's either acceptable for you or beautiful. And so in the end, you should pay attention to your feelings, and if you come out feeling pretty good about yourself after even working through all these frustrations, and you feel like you want to do it all over again, like that is a really good sign. If not, you might want to try to give it another go, or you may, want to reconsider another pursuit. And so after college, like I really did feel good about design, except then I had to go find a job because it was college and I had to pay for stuff. So, I ended up working, my first job was like a marketing assistant, which is just like another name for an admin assistant. And I started taking some design classes on the side. I took like a Photoshop class. I took a Quark Express class, which is also another outdated, obsolete design program, and like a basic graphic design class. And then a few years later, I became like a market research manager. And I would still figure out a way to incorporate graphic design into what I was doing. Like if my boss wanted to have some postcards made, I'd volunteer. I'd raise my hand and I'd say, hey, I'll do it. If I had friends who wanted wedding invitations done, I volunteered to do it. I even volunteered for this program that set you up with nonprofits, and you would create like websites or logos for them. And through that experience, I didn't get paid for any of this, but I gained the experience and I gained practice, and I learned like what I liked and I didn't like. And I definitely did not like doing logos. It's one thing I learned. So reinvention sometimes, like it grows slowly in the background, and it overlaps like currently, like with sometimes what you're doing currently. And the important thing is, even though you're doing sort of what you're doing in the foreground, whatever's happening in the background, like you need to continue to commit time to this new passion, like try to do it every day if possible, to creating this next version of yourself. So a few years later, I decided like, I'm really gonna jump into design, except I decided what I was gonna do was like a much larger scale of design, and I was gonna get into architecture, which was something that I had considered in high school. And so I did this summer program at Cambridge. It was like a 6-week program called, I think, Career Discovery in Architecture, and it really introduces you into what architecture school was like, and I really enjoyed it. And at the same time, I started a wedding invitation company, and it was just like a small online wedding invitation. I had done so many wedding invitations at this point for free that I'm like, I need to get paid for this. So I started an online company. In those days, when you start like an online company, it's not like there weren't any blogs or social media or anything pointing you or pinning you or anything. So the only way anyone would find me is like through a search engine, and like if you like waited long enough to get to me, I was like in there somewhere. And so in 2000, I was accepted to UCLA for the master's program in architecture. And I also brought along my business with me to architecture school. And it was a really bad idea because I don't know if we have anybody who's gone to architecture school here. It does not allow for any free time whatsoever. But the good thing was I wasn't really getting a whole lot of orders. I was just like getting a little bit here and there. And then the following year, like while everyone was doing an internship, and I was like, okay, I'll do an internship next year, I was thinking more like, I need to like pay some of these student loans off. I would rather just like make a whole bunch of wedding invitations this summer and, pay for that, and then I'll, and then go back to school. So I had this great idea to put this like tiny ad in Martha Stewart weddings. It was so small. It was like the smallest ad that you could buy in the back of the magazine. It was just called Marketplace. And that, I had no idea. That ad really catapulted my business. I was just thinking I was gonna get a few orders in. I was like surrounded, like it was just like it wouldn't stop the orders. The funny thing, because the thing is back then, because there weren't any, that was one of the ways to get the word out about your business. And apparently it was a very good way. And there wasn't a lot of competition for what I was doing. And so I hit this, I reached this fork in the road where I had to decide, should I keep going down this road with architecture school, or should, I fill all these orders? And so I decided to fill all the orders. And I didn't go back to architecture. And I was really sad because I really liked it and I enjoyed it, and I thought I was doing well in it. And so between 2002 and 2005, I had, was living the dream, I guess. I was a designer. I was a business owner. I had opened up a shop in San Francisco. And that was my first successful reinvention of myself. But then I had also grown and I had developed new interests, and one of them was interior decor, and the other one was writing. And actually writing was something that I had done in college. I had written, I was a contributing writer for one of the school newspapers. And so my next to my shop was this woman named Lotte Jansdottir, and she had just gotten a stationery line with Chronicle Books, and she was telling me about Chronicle Books, and I'm like, hey, I could write a book for them, because I'm like, I think I can write. And so I pitched a book to Chronicle Books, and I went to their website. They had the submission guidelines, and I turned in this proposal, and it was an awful proposal. It was this book about really off-the-wall weddings. And they turned it down, and rightly so, because if that book actually came out, I probably would have been very embarrassed about it. Anyway, but even though they turned that proposal down, they invited me to come into their office. And so when I came in, I came armed with a lot of ideas. And during that meeting, they turned down a lot of my ideas. And only one survived, and that was a book called You Can Wear It Again, and it was a book all about bridesmaids' dresses. There it is. That's actually one of my coworkers when I was at the market research company. And then around this time, so I just got that book proposal approved, and then one of the editors had come into my shop, and I decided to show her my sketchbook. I'm like, hey, I have this other great idea, and it was a book about interior design planning in your home, and she liked it, and she's like, put together a proposal. So I did, and crazy enough, I actually didn't think it was going to go through. I was like, I don't have any interior design background, or this book isn't going to go through. They approved the book, and so I was like, wow, that's crazy. Now I have two. So I had two books happening now simultaneously. And I went to the meeting at Chronicle, and I met with the art director, and this was for Space Planner, and she says to me, do you know of anyone that can illustrate this book? And I don't know what came over me. I was like, me. Because the thing is, I had not illustrated a thing at all. But I figured, well, if I say me, she might say, like, can I see your portfolio? And then I'd say, well, I don't have one. And then, it would be like, okay, well, let's go find someone that does have one. And, but she didn't. She said, oh, that's great. Like, fine. Oh, you want to do it? That's great. Like, why don't you put together some sketches and, let's get working on this. And from that, so then I was writing and illustrating a book. And so there's Space Planner. And that's one of the illustrations I made. I actually was trying to find all the illustrations, but it was like on this computer that had died. And I was thinking about taking pictures of it with my phone, but it probably looked really bad. So anyway, so after these 2 books came out, I decided it was time to move on from the wedding invitation business, and I started an eponymous line of stationery and home accessories. And actually, these images here were from a period like between I started it around 2005, 2006, and it ended around 2010. And here's some of the designs in that line. But going back, right after I had done Space Planner, I got another gig illustrating a book. And one of the graphic designers at Chronicle Books left, and she was doing freelance, and she was working on a cookbook. And so she had liked what I did with Space Planner, so she asked me to do that book. And that was called The Abundant Table. And so I know it still has all the crop marks. I didn't have time to take it out. So I was like, at this point, really energized by my new identity as an illustrator and a writer. And I pitched another book, and this book was called Craft Ink, which I've talked about. And it was about turning your hobby into a business. And this book was very important for me at this time, because there wasn't really anything out there that was really helping. Like, I wrote it like for me, because I was a business owner, and I had learned a lot of things. Like, I had so many lessons, and I figured like I needed to share these with people. Like, me and a bunch of other designers, we used to always get together, and we'd always try to figure out what to do with our business, and we'd ask each other things like, well, what's a press kit? And literally nobody knew what a press kit was, and we would try to figure out what it was. So that book, like this book, was really for that purpose, for me and for everyone who was doing like the same thing. The funny thing was, it was not as easy a sell of a book as I thought it was, because the other 2 books I felt like, whoa, like I got those, like this one should be easy. This was not that easy, and the reason being, it was I think around the end of 2004 or early 2005, really sort of the early beginnings of what we kind of now know as like the craft and DIY era and the blog era. Etsy wasn't even around, or it may have been in like some really like beta format. So I think maybe there wasn't really this understanding of like how important this book was going to be. But by the time it came out in 2006, it did really well. And which I was really glad about, and it continues to do well to this day. And here's the cover of that book. And this is actually the revised edition, because, like I said, when I wrote that book like in 2005, and there were a lot of things that didn't exist then, like Twitter and Facebook. That first book, like I talked about MySpace, and so it's kind of embarrassing now to like look at that and like, don't look at that, don't ignore my references to MySpace. So this book has all like, was much more of like this technological and social media update. And so that book led to a spin-off called the Craft Ink Business Planner. And I had a meeting with the art director, or actually it was the editor, and they were trying to get this book on this fast track. And she asks me like, do you know how to design books? And I said, yes. I had never designed a book, but I figured like I could figure it out, and I had graphic design friends, and they could help me out. I think because they were trying to fast track this book, they wanted me to simultaneously write and design it at the same time. And so because of that experience, so I ended up writing and designing it. Here it is. I actually went on to design more books. I designed about I think 4 out of the 6 ink books are designed by me. And I've designed other books sort of outside of that. I'm going to show you a couple. This one is Repurposed Library by Lisa Occhipinti and Knit to Flatter by Amy Herzog. These were like more recent. One was in 2011 and the other one's 2013. And I actually know neither one of these authors. I was hired through the publisher, which is Abrams Books. So, okay, again, going back, this is after the Craft Ink Business Planner. Maybe like a couple years later, I pitched another book called, which would later be called Crafting a Meaningful Home, and it was picked up by Abrams Books, and it's a DIY craft book. Okay, so then I had another meeting with one of the editors, and you kind of can get the pattern here now. Like I have the meeting with an editor, she asks, or an art director, they ask me a question, I say, me, and and then I get it, right? So this is sort of a similar story where the editor says to me, like, for this book, we need a stylist. I said, okay. And she's like, do you know of anyone? And I said, well, me, So she didn't actually question at all. She was like, oh, perfect, great, you can do it too. So crafting, and I actually had some interest in it, and I did my research. And this is one thing to note that, I don't go into these things very blindly. Like I do my research, and like when I was doing these styling, I was really doing a lot of planning. I would practice at home, and I would arrange things, and I would photograph it. And so I just really made sure that when I was going into it, that I wasn't going into it very blindly. So Crafting a Meaningful Home was the first book that I had designed, illustrated, and styled. And there it is. Those plates over there are actually Lisa Congdon's plates on the cover. Actually, this illustration, too, I should point out, I didn't do a whole lot of heavy illustrating. It was much more like diagrammatic illustrating. And that really ended up kicking off what would later be a styling career. And I'm going to show you a few images that I've styled. And actually, a lot of these are for Anthology magazine. But I've also styled for catalogs, and I recently just styled a sewing book shoot a couple of weeks ago, and that was pretty fun. It was actually interesting too. That one, they had asked me if I had ever styled, if I had ever done any fashion styling, and I actually hadn't, but I was like, yeah, I did it. And but they made it sound like there wasn't that many fashion shots. It was 80% fashion. But it was fine, and so now I know how to do a little bit of fashion styling. But anyway, so let's go back. So about when I was saying about 5-6 years ago, I thought I was on this path of figuring out what I was going to do. But I was actually really confused because I did think I was on that path, and I was trying to figure out, well, who am I? Which one of these things is really the thing I'm meant to be doing? What is my one passion? I had always done so many different things. And I didn't even mention to you that in this time, I even did these independent design sample sales, which was for a period of about 4 years. And so to my parents, I'd come back and I'd tell them all these things, and I'd be like, all this, this stuff's happening. And I think in their minds, I was kind of a hot mess, but at least I was a successful mess. And I think for them, they just had trouble. I had trouble articulating, and this was kind of my problem, is I had trouble articulating what I was doing. Because a lot of it was happening, and that wasn't happening really fast, but it was just happening all, one after the other. And so my parents had trouble explaining to their family and friends, what I'm doing. They didn't know how to introduce, my friends didn't know how to introduce me at parties. And so my parents had said to me, maybe you should just do one thing. And even I think my literary agent said that too, maybe you should try to focus, maybe on one thing. Just try it out. Maybe you might like it. And so, I started thinking, maybe this is too much. This is too much stuff. I really do need to, bring it in or something. So I did try to do that. I tried it for a couple months. It was hard, and it was actually really depressing. And during this time, too, I decided, because I couldn't figure out what it was, that I was just going to try to find a job. And it was going to be, it wasn't really even particular about this job I was going to get, because I was like, I have a range of skills. Like, I'll get something that fits into it. And I think the reason that I just kind of on a whim decided to do that was because it was sort of this easy thing for me to decide, and I wasn't feeling like I had a lot of structure, and having a job would just instantly give me that structure. And of course, I didn't get any jobs because I think they could tell that I wasn't really that into, like, I didn't do that many interviews. And I think they could tell I wasn't really into wanting a job wherever I was interviewing. And so what I did was I looked back at what I was doing, and I realized that I was always happiest doing several things. And you can tell, like, even in high school, like, I had, like, many different interests. When I graduated from college, I had, like, a whole bunch of, in addition to one degree, I had all these specializations. And so and though I thought, like, I was on the road to finding my calling, and it was driving me crazy because I couldn't figure out what it was, I think what I was really on was the road to satisfying my curiosity. And all of my interests were valid, and of course, some of them didn't work out. And when I realized that I didn't have to be one thing, I actually found some peace. And I stopped this whole business of trying to figure out like who the real me was, and I was like, I'm just gonna focus on figuring out what is it I like right now, instead of focusing on this like real calling in life. And the funny thing too, like later on when I started the magazine, that I ended up utilizing all these things that I'd been doing, and it all ended up like working together there at one place. And, all these various iterations of myself, I realized were all like the real me. And because, I kept thinking who this real me is. And every time at whatever point I was at, those were the real me at those points. And I remember I used to sort of like poo-poo like my previous self, like, oh, like, I should have never gone, done psychology because like that was a waste of time and I shouldn't have done that. Like I didn't even do anything with it. Or I shouldn't have done those wedding invitations, like, because I didn't really enjoy it. But if I look back, like, during that time period, like, between 1992 to 97, I really enjoyed psychology. And from 99 to 2006, I really enjoyed wedding invitation. I think it's just, and I was highly focused on those things. It's just like, I just can't imagine myself doing it now. And so I think that was one thing I used to do, was sort of blame like the past, like, oh, if I had done that or if I had done this, then maybe I would be further along in something else. But there, other things came along that I became more passionate about. But I think it was sort of important for me to realize that during those times I was like living my truth at those points. So the thing about reinvention is that you don't have to apologize for your previous selves, and reinvention doesn't have to be linear, and it doesn't have to make any sense. There are like smaller reinventions, like adding like a new talent to your repertoire, a medium or a style to your art. Like maybe you're a sculptor and you want to become a prop stylist, add that to your talents. And there are sort of these, like, of course, bigger reinventions, like, for example, if you are a graphic designer and you want to be a chef now. And it's possible, too, like, these days to, like, combine those things, to cross-pollinate those fields. And reinventing yourself, like, could mean that, having people think of you in a whole new way, or having people just consider a new aspect of yourself, and of course a mixture of both. And reinvention, can be a move forward, or it could mean a move backwards, like exploring a previous interest that you had when you were younger. And sometimes, like, I think people feel like they've been on like a detour from their real selves, from someone that they used to be. But reinvention does come with its downsides. There is a potential for failure with every reinvention. There is discomfort when you tell people what you're doing next sometimes, and you have to be okay with starting at point zero at something. You have to be okay with being an amateur all over again. So it's equally exciting, but it's also scary. And you have to be disciplined and ready to do the work and the research. And it can sometimes be disruptive in your life, but it can also be life-altering in a great way. And you also get to truly understand and know your potential in more than one thing. But again, like you have to find your own truth. You have to figure out like what situation and what speed is right and comfortable for you. So I've put together some tips for reinventing yourself. First one. Oh, I'm using these. None of these are my illustrations, too. These are just illustrators that I've actually worked with for the magazine. I just went through their website and threw them on here. So number one, make sure the positive feelings outweigh any frustrations. So like when you reinvent yourself, you want to make sure it's something that you find worthwhile. I think like I mentioned before, like, you can hit some headwinds and some frustrations when you jump into something new. But in the end, like the good feelings have to outweigh any frustrations. You have to have enough positive moments to make it worthwhile. And you have to understand too that it might take some time. One way I like to think about it is I like to think about actors, because that is a career of mostly rejection. Like they're constantly being rejected even at like, high points in their career, and eventually they have to land some jobs that they feel good about. They have to have these positive moments to validate them and help them make it through. Let's see, number two, decide what steps you need to take. You have to decide what it's going to take, and this is I guess it's obvious that you need to take the steps you need to take to get there. Like, do you need to go back to school? Do you need to gather more information and research? Do you need to make new friends in the field? Do you need to save some money? Number three, find a mentor. Okay, so I just put, not maybe Walter White, but maybe like Bryan Cranston, the actor. Mentoring is a part of research that goes into learning about the new thing that you want to be. Find someone whose path you appreciate and you want to emulate in some way. What did they do? What's their story? And what can you glean from their experiences? And you don't have to meet them in person, because it might be tough anyway. But you can learn about this person through like interviews, books, blog posts, TED Talks, documentaries. And, don't just find one mentor. Try to find as many as you can that inspire you. Show your work and ideas. So don't be afraid to do that, and like what I've done, like just raise your hand. And, and what I didn't tell you too is about all the times I was rejected. Like I have a lot of bad ideas too. And like there's the good ideas make it through, but I am constantly like just putting my ideas out there. And after, of course, after every rejection, it feels really bad, but then you kind of have to just, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and do it all over again. And eventually, you will land like a good idea, a very positive response, and, that makes it all worthwhile. And, like I've said, like, raise your hand and volunteer yourself, because sometimes that can propel you faster and, make you take that leap faster than you expected. And it also creates opportunities for you to test your skills. Think about your transition plan. If you're going for a major reinvention, there might need to be an interim step before you take that leap. For example, if you want to be a freelance photographer, you might want to probably like consider assisting first before doing it, before going, cold turkey and just doing that. And I think I should also kind of show that with some of the businesses I did, or things I did. Like I would be doing like the wedding invitation business like overlapped with my stationery business. Like I didn't just stop one thing and start the other. There was kind of that period where I was doing both. Number 6, not everyone will be on board with your new self. And especially if you're really successful at what you're doing currently, if you, like leaving behind like a stable, well-paying career or a stable business, sometimes it doesn't and you're leaving that for a new interest, sometimes that might not make any sense to people that you know. So, prepare yourself for some potentially negative feedback and, learn to be patient while they adjust to your new self and lifestyle. So with all this, I feel like, we should be all pumped and ready to, reinvent ourselves. But the funny thing that happens is that sometimes what happens is kind of nothing at all, at least initially. When people make these decisions to jump into a new project, to jump into like a new invention of themselves, sometimes nothing happens for a while. Because I know sometimes people talk to me about like this new project they want to work on, and then I check in with them later, and not a whole lot has happened since we've talked. And I have to say that I'm also guilty of this. Like, I can sit on ideas for a really long time as well. So I have another set of, not necessarily tips, but these are like some sort of behaviors and statements that you should avoid on the path to reinventing yourself. First one is, I'm waiting for the right time. So if you're waiting for like the planets to align, like like a really big window of time to open up, just like this perfect situation like to present itself, it's most likely not going to happen. And so you have to remember that the right time to do it is to do it now and to do it every day. One of my favorite quotes on this is by E.B. White, and he says, "A writer who waits for ideal conditions under which to work will die without putting a word on paper." And this other one by Chuck Close, "Inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work." And next statement is, "I'm too busy." So, I think we hear this like a lot these days. Everyone is slammed with work, with kids, with schoolwork, and nobody has time for anything. And the truth is that if you are really committed to this new interest, you will find the time to do it. And it always comes down to discipline. You have to be disciplined enough to carve out time every day, even if it's like doing like 5 minutes of drawing or taking a picture or something every day. And eventually those routines that you create for yourself start to become you, and then you start doing 5 minutes, and it just starts growing eventually, because the more you're committed to it, you start committing more time to it. Next one is, "I'm waiting for more money," and this lady is clearly just looking out the window, waiting for more money to show up. And this is a tough one. And I think one way to think about it is, like, instead of being like this victim to, your lack of funds, and is to learn how to be resourceful with what you do have. And the thing is, we're all creative people in here, and so it's, just think about like applying your creativity to that to speed things along so that you can start that new thing that you want to do. And this is, "I should have done this in the past." And, I think there are people, and I've been guilty of this too, where I think like, well, I shouldn't have studied that in college, or, oh, I shouldn't have listened to my parents, or I shouldn't have listened to my boyfriend. And the thing is, none of us can change the past. So, what's imperative is that you need to have the leadership to change your future. The last one is, "I'm working on it." And these ladies are clearly not working on it. So we're all like really amazing, I'm sure, at procrastination, and I am very much so. We keep saying that we'll get to it later. And like one example, at least for me, is that I've been talking to Kat Cito, who was a co-author with me on Mom Inc., and we've been talking about like writing this book, and I had this idea, and it's probably been like 3 years that we've been talking about writing, like independently writing these books. And so it's funny because we see each other for lunch like every 2 months, and we check in on each other and we say, "Hey, how's that book coming along?" And we always say, "I'm working on it." And it's funny because now it's like a joke, because we both know that we haven't really been working on it. But I think that's sort of one thing we have, we tell ourselves. And I know, so these are also reminders for me too, that I need to stop saying that, and I need to start being active. So, and this is something that's really important to me. So, if you've been wanting to do something for a long time, the time to do it is now. So, I'm just going to wrap this up. I wish everyone here luck on their road to reinvention, if they choose to take it, of course. Remember to stay committed to your vision, have the discipline to make time for it, be resourceful, be a leader in your life, and also just stop procrastinating. And if you're wondering what my next reinvention is, I'm actually working on being a novelist. So anyway, wish me luck on that.
Thank you so much, Meg. So we have a few minutes now for some questions, and we'll be able to bring a mic over to you, but does anyone have anything that they'd like to ask Meg? We have a few minutes here. Oh, great, you are ready to go. Hi.
You never talked about how you pay your rent. I mean, that's the whole worry thing. Do you live at home or, the stress of the money?
The stress of the money. So with the wedding invitation business, no, it was like a lucrative business. I was salaried there. And then I sold that business. And so the money from selling the business kind of helped launch the next thing, which was the stationery line. I have to say that the stationery line was not nearly as successful as the wedding line. And I was married at this time too, so there was dual income happening here. And with the books and everything else, it's sort of what happens is you have to, I was piecing together all these streams of income. Now I'm not sure, I think so I was married, and I also have 2 kids. I think if I was maybe single with what I was doing, I could probably get by okay. I'm not, but with having kids and all that, having all, my husband's income, that all worked together. I'm trying to think what else. And also with the magazine too, I'm salaried through the magazine as well. So it is, these are businesses and I'm also being paid by that business as well.
Anyone else? Yeah, if you could wait for the mic so everyone can hear your question. Thanks.
So obviously what you're doing right now is not closely related to architecture. And how does architecture, your experiencing studying architecture affect your life?
Okay, so it actually does affect it. I mean, I'm not making buildings or anything, but so one thing I learned when I did architecture was, so I remember this was when I was doing that summer program. They had told us to design seating along the Charles River, so that you could watch rowing and stuff like that. And I remember I created this thing where I was I'm going to create the seating, and it's going to be these mounds of dirt, and it's going to have wood on top, and it looked really pretty. Drew it, and I put it all together. So I brought it to the crit, and instantly the first thing they asked me is the seating that you've created, what's the angle on that? And I had not even thought about it. I was like, an angle? I don't know, maybe 25 degrees from the edge of the shore or whatever. And they're like, well, okay, let's say it's 25. Why wouldn't it be 26 or 27, 28, 30? You need to have a reason why you're putting that thing right there exactly too. Why this spot? Why not that spot? And these are things I hadn't thought about. It was all these why questions, And so, and of course this happens all throughout, and I become smarter, obviously, throughout architecture school in answering these why questions. But what I've carried with me from that experience is that every time now that I create something, and it's sort of it's different with graphic design, because with graphic design you're trying to deliver a message, and you're also trying to do it, composing things in ways that are pleasing to the eye. But with what I learned with architecture is to answer these why questions, even when I'm putting together the magazine, it's like, well, why these two images? Why not these other two? And it has to make sense to me. And I think this is the thing that I learned from architecture. Even like, why that size of the magazine? Why not another size? And so for me, I feel like it's made me like a much more conscientious thinker about every little, like for me, like every little thing matters. And I'm not sure I would have turned out that way had I not gone to architecture school, because they really do make you think about every little thing. And I just feel like it's kind of made me stronger. Even like putting together the magazine, like the first thing I did when I met with An Min is, and she was probably like, what the heck's going on here? Because I was like, well, we have to answer the why questions. She's like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, why are we doing this? You know, and I said, well, we need to articulate why we're doing this. You know, why us? Why do we need to be the one that brings out this magazine? And I think when you start to answer those questions, it does, like, you sit down and you think about it, like, why us? Why, like, what type of articles and why we need to put these things in there? It just becomes like a much more thoughtful thing. So I know, so that's what I got out of architecture. That's one of the things I got out of architecture school. Oh, the other thing too is that I feel like I've gotten, my skin is a lot thicker from going to architecture school because, and I think that helps now too, because I mean, like, just even being on the internet is like a scary place, and so you kind of have to let things like roll off your back. You know, I just, from getting grilled, like, just during that time that I was in school, like, you kind of learn to take things a lot less personally, and I think that's really helpful. Because I think, especially when you're working with clients, you know, and I notice sometimes people get really married to certain things, and I feel like, you know, if I'm working with a client, like, what their needs are much more important than what I'm trying to push through here. And I've learned, like, I feel like I let go. Anyway, I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I was just wondering, like, how have you built teams that align to your creative vision? Like, finding talent that kind of like comes over in the journey with you. For example, for the magazine, like, I bet that you had to find like people that understood your vision, but also that were very good at what they're doing. So how has it been for you to find the talent?
Well, first of all, like, the magazine, and as far as like the core team we have is a pretty small team, and how those people came together, a lot of it was like people were being referred by other, like, this person would be really good. Like, so there was a lot of that. I mean, there's literally 5 of us there, so it's pretty small. But in terms of like working with talent and hiring talent for the magazine, I had worked with some photographers and stylists ahead of time, so that sort of helped, like, sort of initially. And so, but beyond that, a lot of it is, so when talent comes to us, you know, like, they usually introduce themselves or they pitch. So one thing is, like, for me, is that they understand the magazine. So when they pitch a story, it's clear that they've actually read the magazine. So that helps. And then, of course, you know, I review their portfolio, and I feel like if the imagery is in line. The other thing, like, I like to do, and with at least hiring illustrators, is I do like to hire illustrators that have approached us instead of us reaching out to them, because I feel like if they're coming to us, then they actually have seen the magazine. I don't have to, like, you know, introduce the whole magazine. And I also, I mean, for me, it's sort of like this, like, reward system where it's like, you're actually making the effort to send me an email, and I may not always write back, or send me like, marketing materials. And I think it's just because, like, because of writing, like, these ink books, and this is what I tell people to do. And so when they do it, I'm like, you know, good for you. Like, now I'm going to reward you with an assignment or something. But I mean, that's sort of how, in terms of building that talent. And I always, like, I'm trying to find new talent all the time, different people to work with. I don't want to keep working with the same people all the time. We try to introduce, you know, a new illustrator, writer, stylist, photographer, at least, you know, a couple in every issue.
I actually have a question that I'd like to ask you really quickly.
Oh, okay.
So not only did you describe a lot of different kinds of projects that you've worked on
Uh-huh.
over time in reinventing yourself, but you've also reinvented
giving other people opportunities, to being a boss, to an entrepreneur. And one thing that seems to be really tricky for people, especially creative people, you know, when they're used to being like, I will do it myself, I'll figure it out on my own, is
Right.
figuring out what role they want to have in a project or a team. And I was wondering if there's a particular role that you feel most comfortable in working with other people.
I don't necessarily have like a preference. Like I just feel it kind of depends on the project. There are times, you know, I definitely do. The thing too about working alone is sometimes like I work alone and I think it's great, and then somebody sees what I'm doing, they're like, you need to change it. So I always feel like it's always helpful to have like a second eye. There are times I do like working by myself. And one thing I think that you're sort of touching on too is, you know, this jump from working by yourself to working with other people. And that was, you know, there was a point where I had like assistants, and you know, like I had heard, like someone had told me, like, you need to have an assistant because that's gonna like change your life and it's gonna make things easier. And one thing I did not realize was that there was like so much involved in terms of you had to figure out what they were doing. So in addition to you figuring out your day, you had to figure out their day, and then you had to figure out where they were working. And so, and that was like something that I had, and you need to manage them, and you know, there was like, you know, all these things that come with hiring people that I hadn't really thought about. And so that was interesting and challenging. And you know, right now too, like it's a little bit different with the magazine because we don't all come to like an office to work. We all work remotely. We're all free. Like we just all, you know, we talk on the phone, we email, we chat, that kind of a thing. Everybody's working independently. It's really like a really big freelance staff. So in terms of the management, there's not as much happening there. Like we just expect people to be doing, like they have to end up, like they check in with us like every week to tell us what they're working on. And that's sort of the extent of it. I'm not sure if I answered your question
No,
enough.
that's great.
I would like to tie that to the why. When you ask why,
Oh, yes.
So I would like to tie all of that to the asking why.
Uh-huh.
When you get to the essence of why you do things, you are more authentic.
Yes.
And you really know where your passion is. And so if you ask this question, and all the people that approach you ask this question, you're all already very focused on moving and pushing forward.
Right.
And there is already kind of like a coherent kind of push towards the same place.
Right.
Because they seek you and you know what you're about, so you're already kind of connected around that.
Yeah, I think it's so important whenever you do start any project is to ask yourself that question and really be able to articulate it, because it really does help.
Yeah. And you don't need to manage them. I mean, the assistant part is very true, that if you hire an assistant, you do need to figure out all the work that you want to give them, and you know, you need to manage two people.
Yeah,
So
and then the whole training, there was like, at least two, when I had hired assistants, they were really new to everything that I was doing. They were new to the business, they were new to the world that I was working in, like in terms of like, you know, understanding the design world, and I had to introduce them, like these are, you know, these are things you need to be aware about. So there was this whole education and training that I really, like I didn't realize how much time I needed to block out for that. Thank you.
I think this will be the last question. Real quick, yeah. Let's see. I guess. Okay, quick question.
I want to know, do you still think, is it still beneficial for you, you think, to advertise in periodicals and magazines as opposed to maybe word of mouth or going through people that you've known or worked with?
It's so different these days, and I think, so there are different types. So when you advertise, what it is in terms, like, so what I was doing back then, that little ad was like really just to direct you to go to my website, and I think, you know, there are some ads that are definitely, that do that, but what happens if you're gonna do that approach is that these days it really is about it's this reminder. you may not get somebody to go to your website right away, but if they see your business like in several different places, that kind of legitimizes you. It's like they see you in like the magazine, they see you on like a banner, and it's actually, it only works through repetition most of the time with print with advertising, is that you have to constantly be seen. And so it does work, but in that way, it's like this, it's more of a brand recognition thing. Wait, I think there was a second part to your question, but I couldn't.
I'm just trying to figure out whether it's still worth it because of the way periodicals and magazines are. I mean, if it's something that needs to be done repetitiously, that answers it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and that's, for the companies that advertise in the magazine, I mean, I know that they're placing it in so many different places, and it's for brand recognition.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Great. So good morning, everyone. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself earlier when I was up here for questions, but my name is Emily Torella, and I'm an academic advisor here at CCA. I work with students in the painting and drawing departments, interaction design, industrial design, and furniture programs as well. I am so pleased to be able to introduce Lisa Congdon, but first I just wanted to make a quick note that we actually have a raffle that's going on. The winners will be chosen after lunch, and the raffle has an entry in which you can put your business cards in there. There's a kind of big fishbowl down by the sign-in table where you got your stickers. If you don't have a business card with you, there are blanks, and the winners of the raffle get some really beautiful Chronicle postcard sets. So I highly encourage you to enter some good prizes. So again, the winners will be drawn after lunch. So after the session's over, you should go and enter. So anyway, I was really kind of tickled when I was listening to Meg's speech, which was excellent, by the way. But one of her tips was find a mentor. And I feel really lucky to be able to introduce Lisa because she has actually been a key mentor in my life for the last 4.5 years. When I was a senior in college at a school back east, I had heard about Lisa's work, was really excited about it, and I blindly emailed her. And she really graciously responded. We chatted on the phone, and I worked with her between my fall and spring semester to assist her in her studio and also to support her in this collection a day blog project, which was later made into a book, which you'll maybe hear a little bit more about later. But I did really want to just say that everything that Meg said is absolutely true, and being able to work with Lisa absolutely changed my life and also inspired me to move to San Francisco. Lisa's generosity in her practice, her openness, and breadth of projects was and still is incredibly inspiring to me, especially as a woman in the arts. Lisa is best known for her colorful paintings and drawings. Since 2007, she's been illustrating for clients including Museum of Modern Art, Martha Stewart Living, Chronicle Books, Land of Nod, the Obama Campaign, and Simon & Schuster, among many, many others. Lisa also is known for her intricate line drawings, pattern design, and hand lettering, and has licensed her work for fabric, kitchen linens, wallpaper, bedding. And in addition to illustrating full-time, Lisa maintains a thriving Etsy shop, writes a popular daily blog of her work, life, and inspiration called Today is Going to Be Awesome. She's the author of A Collection a Day, Whatever You Are, Be a Good One, and Art Inc., as you heard from Meg earlier. Lisa also shows her work in galleries around the country, including at Bedford Gallery and the Contemporary Jewish Museum. She's also an avid cyclist and swimmer. She lives and works in Oakland, California, and it is my distinct pleasure to be able to introduce Lisa Congdon.
Thank you, Emily. That was so nice. Okay, so today I am going to talk to you about getting paid and getting the word out. Now, when we talk about getting paid, I'm not going to talk about billing or anything like that, so don't worry. I am going to talk about how to sell your work. in a few different ways. And so I'll get into that a little bit later. And getting the word out part is about promoting your work, which has been a big part of my story, as you will see. So, all right, is the easiest way to change the slide by pressing on this thing? On the keyboard? Okay, sorry. There we go. Welcome. As Emily mentioned, my name is Lisa Congdon, and I'm an artist and a writer, among other things, which I'll tell you about in a minute. I live here in Oakland, literally around the corner. I walked here today. You might see me about once a week at the Blick across the street, getting supplies. I lived in San Francisco for years, and one of the greatest things about the location where we ended up was that it was so close to an art supply store, although because of you guys, they are out of a lot of things quite often compared to the one in Berkeley or San Francisco. For the record, I did not go to CCA. In fact, I didn't go to art school at all, which I'll talk about, although my wife, Clay, is the director of marketing here, so I have a very intimate relationship with CCA and have been coming to events here and participating here for a long time. I'm going to take questions at the end. I actually have a big chunk of time here, and don't worry, I'm not going to talk at you for the hour and a half, probably about 45 minutes, and then I'll take questions at the end. So if you think of anything as I'm talking, I'm going to give you a lot of nuts and bolts information, like a lot of practical stuff. So if you think of anything that I haven't answered or that's confusing or that you want to know more about, just write it down and I'll be sure to answer when I'm finished. Okay, I'm going to have to keep pulling this drawer out. Here we go. Who is Lisa? And why am I standing in front of you today to talk about selling your work and promoting your work? These are some of the things that I identify as. And of course, like Meg and I are actually really close friends because, we've actually known each other for years, and I've collaborated on other projects before we wrote Art Inc. together. But like Meg, I do lots of different things, and I feel a little schizophrenic half the time, but I also wouldn't have it any other way. I'm an artist with a fine art practice, an illustrator who also licenses her work. I'm a doodler, a collector, and unfortunately, I don't have any images of my collections project, though you can find them on my website. A hand letterer, a traveler, and an author. One of the things that I am is a late bloomer. This photo is a recent one of some small paintings. But back in 2001, I took my first painting class. I was 31 years old, so if you do the math, I'm 46 now. And, but at the time, I was looking for something to fill the time outside of my job at an education nonprofit. I was really nervous to take the art class. I hadn't taken an art class since I was a kid. I didn't even take art in high school or college. I was creative, yes. I sewed and made crafts. I grew up in a home where that kind of thing was encouraged. My mother is actually an artist, ironically. But I did not identify as an artist at all, or somebody who was even remotely artistic. I didn't even know if I was going to enjoy the painting class or if I would be any good. That painting class changed my life, not in a big explosive way and not overnight. I now paint mostly large abstracts. As you can see, there's one I did recently that I'm standing in front of in this picture that is actually going to hang in the lobby of a building in San Francisco. But my work back then was very different than it is now. I painted mostly representationally for a long time. And that original painting class set me on a trajectory that led to what I do today. 15 years later, I am a working artist, and I have been since about 2007. At first, it was a hobby that gained momentum and grew exponentially as I grew artistically and I began to share my work on the internet, which was relatively new at the time. Then several years later, in 2007, I left my job and began my self-employed life. And then, at the end of 2010, I hit my tipping point. You can see here a really small sampling of the illustration work that I do. My client list for illustration now totals over 50 publishers and companies and a few nonprofits, including 826 Valencia, the Obama campaign, the Freedom to Marry campaign. For the last 4 years, I have been in a place of opportunity. Sometimes that opportunity is so great that it is almost as overwhelming as the frustration I felt when I was first starting out. And that's an important thing to remember. We all fantasize about what will happen when this thing that we love to make or do or design becomes big and people want it. And what happens is overwhelm. And so that is the other side of success that we don't often talk about. And it's something that I'm starting to talk about more. We all want it, and it's a great thing to get to, but how do we manage it? In the course of a few years, I went from starving, not literally, of course, to thriving. Somebody earlier in Meg's session asked a question about money, like how was Meg paying the bills with all these disparate jobs? And we managed to make it work, and sometimes it feels really hard. But now I make my full-time living painting and drawing mostly. I also do some public speaking and writing. I work in the worlds of illustration and licensing. I show my work in galleries. I teach. I write about my work, and I sell my work online. I am a doodler and a dabbler at heart. I keep sketchbooks, which I share with my internet followers on a regular basis. Next week, I'm actually giving a talk just about my sketchbooks at Portland Design Week. And Meg said something earlier, too, about showing your work and your process. And this has been a really important part of my story, that I take pictures of pretty much everything I draw and share it with my followers. One of the things I attribute to my success is my use of the internet, which I'll talk about a bit later in my talk. Over the past several years, I have built a following for my work through the use of social media, and I'll also share with you how I've done that and the benefits of using social media daily and concertedly to promote your work and your story. I am someone who does a lot of different things, as you can see, from hand lettering to pattern design to painting to illustration. Instead of honing in, I have branched out. Similar to Meg and I are sort of kindred spirits in that way. On my path, I have learned many things about what worked and what didn't in my efforts to become a full-time working artist. I began to write them down, and in 2012, Chronicle Books and Meg contacted me. By the way, these are some of my other books leading up to Art Inc., and I'm working on 2 more right now. One will come out in 2015 and one in 2016. Anyway, Meg and Chronicle contacted me in 2012, and they said, and I had been working with Chronicle as an illustrator, most notably, and I had some stationery with them, and then I also illustrated a tome of Gertrude Stein poetry called Tender Buttons, which was an epic project, because if you know anything about Gertrude Stein's poetry, it makes no sense whatsoever. I don't have a picture of that book up here because I didn't write it, but anyway, it was quite a project. My editor is sitting in here chuckling right now. So they said, we want you to write the next book in the Ink series, and I was very familiar with the Ink series because I knew Meg. And I was like, who, me? Like, you know, who am I to write this book? And they're like, well, you're a successful working artist and you do all of these things, so we want you to write it down. And I had to really think about it. I was about to leave on a month-long solo adventure to Scandinavia, which is one of my favorite places in the world, and where I draw a lot of inspiration. And Meg needed an answer before I left. And I said, okay, I'll get back to you on that. And I finally agreed. I said to myself, if I am not the one to write this book, am I going to regret it later? And the answer was yes. So shortly thereafter, we set to work on writing the book. And the book is really about all the stuff that I did that led to a steady income, a steady influx of work, an abundance of opportunity. It also includes a lot of the mistakes that I made and that other artists made along the way. And I was interested in sharing that information. And I've been writing about my work and my process and my path on my blog for many years, so I was pretty comfortable writing about it, although writing a business book is quite different. I wanted to share that information with people who are just starting out. I also interviewed almost 20 people for the book, although not all the interviews are in the book. Successful artists, agents, gallery owners. In fact, I interviewed Jessica Silverman, who is a CCA alum who owns Silverman Gallery in San Francisco, on their perspectives about what it takes to make it in the art world. And I cover everything from the fine art world, which I'm actually not going to talk about today, to illustration and licensing, which I am going to talk about, and then selling your work online, promoting your work, setting up a business, managing workflow, you know, and a little bit of the sort of emotional side, which is fear and sort of embracing your path as an artist. And much of what I'm going to talk about today is from this book, which contains a ton more information than what you're going to hear in the next 45 minutes. Copies will be for sale later. If you want to buy one, you can also buy it on Amazon and lots of different places, and I'll be around to sign copies too if you like. All right, so the next part of my talk is about selling your own work, and here we're talking about physical work, not the rights to your work or images of your work. We'll talk about that later in the next segment that I'm going to do on licensing and illustration. In this part, I'm going to talk about the most common and easy ways to sell actual physical work on the internet. So the distinction here between physical work, actual paintings or drawings or print reproductions, and the rights to your work is important. But another important distinction here is selling your own work versus having a gallery or art dealer sell your work for you. That may be a path that you're on and that you want to pursue, and you need to be a little careful because often galleries want your work to be really exclusive, and so if you're selling it on your own, you have to negotiate sort of what you're selling versus what they're selling. But if you're interested in selling your own work, I'm going to give you some information on that today. You may have aspirations to one day have representation by a gallery if you're interested in being a fine artist, and you may want to pursue that now as one of your goals, and that's great. The job of art dealers and gallerists is really important. But here we're talking about the direct sale of your work where you are acting as your own seller. In other words, through Etsy or other online venues, through wholesale to stores, and through commissions. I'm not going to talk about art and craft fairs today, but if you have questions about that, I'm happy to answer them later. This way of selling your work is great because you get to drive the bus, so to speak. All right, I'm going to talk you through many of the options for selling your work, and there are others that I will not cover. You're welcome to ask questions about those. So we've got selling your physical work. Well, actually, I already went through this, sorry. Here we go. Through an online venue, wholesale to a storefront, consignment, and commissions. I'm going to talk about each of these. All right, selling your work online. So you've got online venues. First kind of venue I'm going to talk about is the online marketplace, and then I'm going to talk about standalone store solutions and e-commerce on your site. All right, the online marketplace. So the most popular online marketplace is what? Etsy, okay? So the great thing about online marketplaces is that people who have never seen your work before can find you through the marketplace because your inventory comes up in their search feature. So you think of an online marketplace as a big shopping mall with lots of different stores. You can literally walk in and search the directory to find what you're looking for. As a person who has a shop in an online marketplace, people can find you by searching for particular keywords. So for example, and that's why putting keywords in your descriptions is really important, which we'll get to in a little bit. This is one advantage of an online marketplace. The onus is not on you to get people to your shop. I mean, part of it is on you. You want to always promote your work in lots of different ways. But one way to do that is just to have a shop where people can find you through the search tool. Now, it's hard on Etsy because Etsy's enormous, and there's like 1 million people on there. So your inventory is included in the database, but it's, you know, you want to make yourself stand out. They also have built-in e-commerce systems and often include incredible features like options to calculate postage and print shipping labels. You can get, Etsy has amazing features like you get data about your shop visits, and I mean the stuff that they have introduced in their in their tool section is just incredible now compared to where it was when they started. And you can get help, not just from staff at Etsy, for example, but from people in online forums. They really involve, it's a community. They really involve the people who sell there in the running of the entire business. I'm doing a terrible job at going through my slides. Cost is your cost is based on your listings, which is pretty minimal, and your percentage of sales. So you're not paying monthly fees. That's based on whatever you list. You can link to social media through them, so sharing is really easy. If somebody likes something that they see in your shop, they can post it on their Facebook page, and other people can find you that way. But as I mentioned, standing out can be challenging. Nowadays, there is a catch-22. Join a marketplace like Etsy, and people can find you who might never have heard of you before. In fact, people like art directors, people organizing art shows, even troll Etsy to find talent. So you'd be amazed at the kinds of people who are on there looking around. But the flip side is that Etsy market is so saturated that it's hard to stand out from the crowd. And the trick is creating unique work and marketing it in a way that drives people, both inside and outside Etsy, to your shop. All right, that's a screenshot of my Etsy shop. And you can see this is a screenshot of my friend Claudia's Etsy shop. You can see, like, the format is pretty similar. We have headers that are the same exact size. You can't really personalize too much on these. But that's okay because you have, you have these sort of built-in systems. The next we're going to talk about standalone store solutions. So these are stores like Big Cartel and Shopify, okay? Here's a screenshot. Oh, well, I'm going to go through these points, but I'm going to also show you a picture of illustrator and designer Jessica Hish's Big Cartel shop. And you can see, this is just a screenshot, but she's made it look really unique and taken advantage of their design tools. And that's one advantage to Big Cartel. Nowadays, you can actually get in there and make it look unique, even though you're sort of in a templated, formatted situation, unlike Etsy, where everyone's shop looks the same except for their header. And of course, depending on the service, all of this comes with a price. The more options you want, typically the more you pay. The more items you want to list, the higher your monthly fees. The more bells and whistles you want, the higher package price, okay? And your design experience can be used to your benefit. You can really now personalize through sites like Big Cartel. Some offer marketing tools where you can share through social media links. It's a great option to have. The one downside compared to an online marketplace like Etsy is that you are responsible for driving traffic to your site. Places like Big Cartel don't list your inventory in their search. So if you're a person who has a following and is interested in driving your own traffic to your shop, this is a great option. Someone like Jessica, who's got like a gazillion followers, can easily go to this format and make it work. Another option is e-commerce on your site. So in this situation, you're hosting your own shop on your own website, okay, with a built-in shopping cart solution. Typically, building something like this on your site is really expensive. Developers sometimes charge, 5 figures for something like this. But many of these systems have built-in emails to customers and inventory systems that are really nice to have. And the best part is that you can completely integrate your shop into your site, the look and feel of it, the design of it, everything. And people don't have to leave your site. They're there. You can completely integrate it into your brand. People aren't leaving your site to go elsewhere. But again, the onus is on you to drive traffic to your shop. There is no marketplace where people are finding you. Okay, so that's an overview of 3 different options for selling your work online. I personally have an Etsy shop. A lot of sellers, I used to have a Big Cartel shop also to sell original works. Now I just sell my original. I don't have very many original works for sale. They usually go straight to galleries, so I don't sell as many of them in my Etsy shop anymore. But a lot of people, like my friend Claudia, has a built-in shopping cart solution in her Claudia Pearson illustration site, she also has an Etsy shop. So she's got places for people to find her in different ways. Some people have an Etsy shop and a big cartel shop or whatever. So it's also not necessary to just choose one. You can have all three if you want. Oh yeah, this is a shot of Claudia's built-in site. Oh, sorry. Stupid animation. If you go back, you have to go through the whole thing again. Sorry. Okay, next we're going to talk about wholesale. All right? So a great way to bring your work, if your work is conducive to wholesale, and not everybody's artwork is, if you're an illustrator or a potter or even a photographer or somebody who makes objects, you're an industrial designer, you make objects to sell, wholesale can be a really great option for you. So, and it's a great way to bring your work to a new audience, to sell through a retail shop. When you sell your work through a shop, this is considered wholesale. All wholesale means is that the shop is buying your art in bulk, several pieces at a time usually, most likely reproductions or prints or notebooks adorned with your work, at a reduced price, typically 50% of the retail price. Then the shop sells the art or products for a profit at the regular retail price. So you make 50% and they make 50%. There's a whole formula for figuring out what to price your work at so that you're not barely scraping by because you're selling it. You know, it's always better to sell work yourself because you make more money, but wholesale can be a great way to get your work out into the world and actually can be profitable if you price your work in the right way. I'm not going to get into that today because we just don't have time, but there's a lot of information about that on the internet. We'll also talk about selling original art, which I actually recommend doing on consignment because you have more control in consignment than wholesale. You're literally selling your stuff to somebody else who's going to sell it for you, and you lose a lot of control. So you want to, if you're interested, there's two ways to do it. Etsy has a wholesale option where people can find you. So if you're already a member of Etsy, this is a great option, or if you want to be a member of Etsy. You can also contact potential shops yourself. And you want to make sure that the shops are a good fit. The products that they carry already, especially other artwork they carry, other illustration products or prints or notebooks or whatever it is you sell. And you want to make sure that whatever you're doing is in line with their overall brand and that you'd feel proud to be associated with them. Remember also that when you sell wholesale, you give up some control, like pricing. If you want to stick to a specific guideline for pricing, make sure you communicate that to the store. So let's say you have had printed 100 notebooks with your artwork on them, and you figured out that you need to sell them to a store for $6 a piece, and they're going to retail for $12. And if it's important to you that you never walk into that store and see your item priced more than $12 or less than $12, you need to make sure you get that in writing from the shop and that they're going to agree to that. Because ultimately, when you sell somebody something, they can do whatever they want with it. They can mark it down to $2 and put it on sale if they want, which you might find mortifying. Or likewise, they could double the price. That might be okay with you, but you might also feel like you want your work to be accessible or at a certain price point. So make sure you communicate those things. Similarly, shops may have their own requirements like exclusivity. For example, that they are the only shop in a certain geographic region to sell your product. And so you want to make sure that, if you want your stuff in every shop in the Mission, you got to make sure that every shop in the Mission or on Piedmont Avenue or whatever is okay with you having your stuff in every shop also on the same street. Does that make sense? And some people will say, some shops are so exclusive that it's like, we're the only one in San Francisco to have you, And if you're kind of a big deal, that might actually work. Most of the time, it might just be in a general neighborhood, okay? All right. So consignment, similar to wholesale, but a little different. So in a consignment, and consignment is actually what you're basically engaged in when you work with a gallery, especially a gallery who doesn't represent you or maybe shows your work temporarily. So it's an agreement with the shop. You maintain ownership of the artwork, and if it doesn't sell, you can take it back into your possession. You're actually not, the shop's not writing you a check for whatever, you get paid as it sells. And this is great for original works, and the reason I say that is if you sell original works, and I mean artworks, I think if you are somebody who makes leather goods or other sort of usable products, wholesale is great. By this I mean like original one-of-a-kind artwork. Selling that wholesale can feel a little scary because if it doesn't sell, it sits there and can get marked down on sale, it can get thrown in the trash. I like to maintain control over my original artwork if it ends up in a store. So I always try to do consignment. If it doesn't sell, I can take it back. In fact, I can take it back. You can usually take it back at any time. But for reproductions, I recommend staying away from consignment for the most part, because you only get paid as things sell, and you could find yourself having a store return a lot of old merchandise long after it's sort of gone out of fashion or that you're not doing that thing anymore, and then you've got all this stuff that you haven't been paid for. Managing consignment can also be a lot of work. You have to keep track of inventory and reconcile that against monthly payments from the retailer. You have to really trust that the retailer is keeping good track of what's selling and that you're getting paid for all of that. So there's a bit of bookkeeping and communication that needs to happen. I hope that difference between the two makes sense. All right, sorry, I'm like talking and not doing my slides very well. Taking commissions. So I am sure since all of you are in art school or art school graduates, you know what commissions are. But for those of you who may be confused, it's when you create a piece of work specifically for someone. And this is a little similar to but different than illustration commissions, which I'm going to talk about later, which are commercial in nature. These are sort of personal commissions, the ones I'm talking about here. So if you enjoy making art that is specifically for other people, then commissions might be a great fit for you. They come with some risk, and that is because the client is agreeing to begin paying you, usually before they've seen the final artwork, because it's always good to get a down payment, which I'll talk about in a second. And it can create the expectation and pressure that they should like the work in the end, right? Like somebody's like, I want you to make this painting for me. Usually it starts out being friends and family, but then eventually, if people start following your work, they might say, there's nothing in your shop I really like, or there was nothing in your show that you just had at that gallery that I really liked. Can you make something special for me? Which feels a little scary, right? Because you don't know if they're gonna. They can describe to you what they want, or they want it like something you already made, or in a particular style. But it's a little bit risky, and it can be nerve-wracking. A lot of people don't do commissions because they find them too much pressure. But they're great for artists who like working with people and the challenge of creating art within constraints, much like commercial illustration work. Often commissions feel very casual, but you have to, especially if you're doing this with family or friends, and maybe in that case you don't necessarily need to have a written agreement if you trust the person, but it's important to remember you're entering a business relationship with your commission client. Your ability to communicate with your customer will ultimately determine if your commission is successful. All right, so listen to and respond to your client's needs, and in a second I'm going to go over some of the things you should lay out in advance if you're interested in taking commissions. Did I do that? Sorry. All right, you've got a commission, the agreement. Price structure and purchase policies. This should be laid out at minimum in an email, and if you're working with a corporate client, like that big painting that you saw a picture of earlier that I made, I had to invest, $1,100 in the panel alone. I had to buy all of the materials to paint it. That was the largest commission I've ever gotten. And they agreed to pay me a large amount of money, but I wanted to make sure that that was all laid out. And this is a big company, so I have a contract with them that I signed before I even started making the artwork. And that's really important when you're working with corporate clients or kind of big name, potentially, commissions, or even a museum commission or a gallery commission. You want to get a contract. But for everyday, it's sort of personal, regular everyday people who are just buying your work, this should suffice to do this in email. What is the price of the commission and what does it include? So you want to make sure you lay that out. You want to get the size of the piece, as much information down about what they want. You also want to get clear on how the client will pay you. And also, if they're not happy with the completed piece, are they obligated to pay you at the end? Like, what if you make this thing that they commission you for, you get all the art direction from them, and then they're like, actually, I'm not sure I like that, or whatever. You didn't quite capture my dog's nose the way I wanted you to. So it's also common to require an upfront non-refundable payment of 25 to 50%, and I usually do 25%, unless, like when I do an abstract painting commission, I don't require an upfront fee because I know I can resell the piece to somebody else, because there's no narrative in it, it's just an abstract piece of art, and my abstract work sells pretty quickly. So, but if it's a representational piece of somebody's dog, or even, a picture of a forest that they want me to paint or draw, I make sure I get a fee ahead of time, because I don't know that I'm going to be able to sell it to anybody else if they don't like it. Now, of course, you want the client. I've never had a client reject a piece outright. But there's always the chance that will happen, or they'll change their mind, or they'll say, oh, you know what, I ran out of money, I don't really want this anymore. And people, you would think that would be terrible and so horrible, but like, those things happen. So again, when you're doing work of a personal nature, make sure you get a fee. Outline the time frame for completion. Set a delivery date that feels realistic and that the client can agree to. Like, they may be like, can I get this in 2 weeks for my dad's birthday? And if you can do it in 2 weeks, that's great. But definitely charge more money if they want it rushed. But if with your workload or the way that you work, if whatever you're making for them is going to take more than the time they want, make sure you get them to agree to the time frame. And be upfront about that in the beginning. And make sure, I say sometimes my lead time, depending on what I'm working on at the time, is 3 months. And most of the time, if people want your work bad enough, they will wait. You want to get clear on art direction, similar to when you're working on an illustration project with a client. In the beginning, you should request written direction from them, and even include that in your written agreement. Asking questions like, what specific subject matter do you want? What style of my work would you like me to emulate, especially if you have more than one style? Get really clear about what they want. And if, ask more questions rather than less, and that will, save you time in the end. Occasionally, a client will give you carte blanche to just do whatever you want, but I still think it's important to try to get as much information as possible. And if you're doing a portrait commission, I ask for high-res, high-quality images. Once I agreed to a portrait commission for a client, and all she had was one of those square photos from the early 70s or late 60s, and her mom was in it. It was kind of a sweet picture, but her mom was literally this big, right? And even when I scanned it at 700 DPI and blew it up, I could not see what her mom looked like. But I had agreed to do this, and I felt really bad, and so of course I make this painting. And it looks nothing like her mother, because I can't really see her mother in the photo. And she sent me other photos of her mom, but it just didn't translate. I did my best, and she took the commission and she paid me for it. But I was embarrassed because I hadn't captured the essence of her mom. And she, I think, was a little disappointed. So those things happen. All right, let's talk about pricing. If you ask any artist for tips on pricing one-off artwork, you might hear a big sigh, right? And again, I'm talking about pricing your own work. When you work with a gallery, that's really their responsibility to help you price your work, or even to price your work for you. In this case, I'm talking about if you're selling work yourself. So because art is so subjective, there's no easy mathematical formula for attaching a price tag. Ultimately, it's no more than an educated guess, but it really is key to educate yourself. So first, you should always understand or start thinking about the price based on what you think the work is worth, and not where it's being sold. No matter where your art is sold, it should have a fairly consistent price tag. The same piece of art shouldn't bear different price tags when you're selling it online versus in a shop or gallery. Inconsistent pricing confuses people, and if people are paying attention to your work, they will notice. It's also helpful to understand how people make buying decisions. And, you know, some people purchase art because they just love art or they love your art. Some people purchase it for decoration. They're just looking for something pretty to go over their sofa, which might make your stomach turn, especially if your work is conceptual or something, but that's how people make decisions. For financial investment, or a combination of factors. And it can be a calculated decision, or it can be a whim. So, you know, buyers purchase art based on connections they make with the piece, and that's really important. And ultimately, they may then, the next step, if they're going to try to buy it or not, depends on whether they can afford it. And so ultimately, you need to understand the big picture of the art market when you're pricing your work, so that the price on your work seems fair to people who are looking at it. So you want to evaluate as objectively as possible the relevance or popularity of your own work in relationship to the larger art market or the niche in which you sit. And if you're not aware of what niche you sit in the art market or the illustration market, try to get to know that. You'll also need to consider if you have a following or a fan base for your work, collectors, people who are dying to buy it whenever it comes out. Obviously, if you end up working with a gallery, have your gallery rep or you know, help you price your work. So you want to familiarize yourself with other artists who are creating work similar to yours, how their work is priced, whether it's selling. A good way to think about pricing your art is the way a real estate agent would set the price of a home. So like comparables, in that, you know, an agent decides what a house that he's about to list should go for by looking at comparables in the neighborhood. And it's a similar thing. You want to look in your neighborhood. How much, and that depends on how much experience you have, how much prestige you have attached to your work or your career, and you know, look at other artists who sell work, who have similar backgrounds, similar mediums, sell work in comparable venues, who have similar experience or accomplishments or schooling even. Researching comparables is a great way to set prices if you're totally, you know, dumbstruck about how to start it. Now, don't take this the wrong way. I say start low, I mean start low as opposed to high. And for low, I don't mean price your work cheaply. I just mean in the range of prices, it's better to start on the lower end than the higher end, because you can always raise your prices, and it's not a good idea to take your prices down or mark your work on sale. Okay? And then also you want to offer a variety of price points. If you offer smaller or less time-intensive pieces at lower prices, people who like your work but can't afford the big stuff will have the opportunity to come away with something that they love. You saw in that picture early on, I had 4x4-inch paintings that I had, and they were all hung together in art gallery, and they were pretty inexpensive. So if somebody wanted to buy a bunch of them, they could, but I always make sure that I've got either small pieces or reproductions for people to buy. So if they can't afford the more expensive stuff, they can buy those. Later, those people may come back when they have money to buy something of yours that's more expensive. You've got a shop, now what? Promote the crap out of it. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. All right, tips for running a successful shop. This may seem like a no-brainer, but one of the most important aspects of running a successful art business is to be aware of what's trendy and all of that. But if your work is similar to that work of hundreds of other artists or makers or designers, your work won't stand out as easily. And you want to always ask, what is my unique perspective? How is my work different? And capitalize on the answers to those questions, not on fitting in. You want to vary your price points, offering a variety of sizes and price points. We just talked about that. And you also want to showcase your art with high quality photos, natural lighting. I scan my work and show cropped images mostly. If I'm selling a three-dimensional piece, I will take a well-lit photo of it that shows the framing, if there is a frame, for example. You want to, use Photoshop and make sure that you've got all of the glitches out of there, and that the colors actually match the the artwork that somebody's going to get in the, get in the mail if they've bought it online. You want to make sure that your product photos match the real thing to the extent possible. And in a lot of times when you're selling your work online, people are going to see something that's the size of a postage stamp. So make sure that those photos translate, okay? Figure out a way to photograph your work so that even at the size of a postage stamp, people can recognize it and that it pops out at them. You want to leverage tags and keywords. If you're in Etsy, this is especially important. It's how people find you. But even on the internet, just making sure that you've got enough descriptive words so that when somebody does a Google search, that they might stumble on you. There's obvious ones like the type of art you're selling: a painting, a print, a ceramic pot, the medium, paint, collage, clay, or key colors. If you work in Etsy, there's this great trick, which is you can start typing in some keywords that you think might lead people to your shop, and just write them down, because the ones that pop up in the, how when it's like autofill and you start typing something in, those are the most popular ones. Those are the ones that may end up leading people to your shop. So use keywords, research keywords on Etsy to find out what people are going to, how they might help drive traffic to your site or to your shop. You want to be descriptive. Use your product descriptions to preemptively answer questions that customers may have. And if you're selling wholesale and that shop is going to put your product in their online shop, make sure that you provide them with a good product description so they don't have to write it themselves, especially if you don't trust other people to write good product descriptions. Some shops are great at that, some shops aren't. You want to communicate important details like medium, dimensions, all of the stuff that you could potentially get emails about. Like, I had an Etsy listing recently where I had forgotten to put the dimensions on the piece. People had been buying it without knowing the dimensions, but this one person was kind enough to point that out to me. And sometimes, we get careless and forget, but these are the things that it's important to make sure are in there. Make sure when you're shipping, you want to invest money in good packing materials, especially when you're shipping original art that can't be easily replaced. I sell tons of prints on Etsy, and if one of them arrives bent, I do everything I can so that doesn't happen, but it happens about once a month. I can reship it, and it's not that big of a cost to me. But with original art and it arrives damaged, you're in trouble. So make sure you invest money and stickers and for the outside and packing materials and making sure that things are really well packaged. I have a whole section of about that in my book, Art Inc. And you also want to clearly state your policies. When do you ship? Do you ship when orders come in the next day? Do you ship once a week? Do you take returns and exchanges? Do you protect against loss and damage? All of those things, it's really important to state up front and to get clear on up front. You want to also have excellent customer service. Making your customers happy will encourage them to return and recommend your shop to their friends. As a small business owner, you're in the position to make a personal connection with buyers. Answering customer service emails quickly with a polite, positive attitude shows that you understand and care. It can also foster high reviews from customers if you're in an online marketplace like Etsy, which lends cachet to your business. All right, we're going to move on now to talking about selling your work, getting your work into the world, part 2, selling the rights to your work through illustration and licensing. All right. Illustration and licensing versus fine art. What's the difference? I think you all probably know this, but for the record, illustration and licensing is commercial. Fine art is not commercial, okay? And that doesn't mean that fine artists don't use the same methods to promote and publicize their work or the same mediums or that the work doesn't end up looking the same in the end. It's just that it's made and sold for different purposes. All right. what is illustration? Illustration is not defined by its medium, but by its context. Any art form, even abstracted art, can be illustration. The difference is the artwork is used to illustrate or decorate something. Again, a book, a magazine, a product, an advertisement. That's what makes it commercial. In illustration, you typically work with an art director or an editor who hires you to create something specific for a book, magazine, product, campaign, if you're working in advertising. And this is a whole different experience if you are used to making work based on your own ideas and inspiration. So if you have aspirations to be an illustrator or you're in the illustration department, you probably know about this already. But if it's something you're just thinking about, it is a whole different world than being a fine artist. They're both amazing and great, but they're very different. There are several illustration markets, which is great because you get to find your niche. And I'm going to talk about those now. All right, so we have personal clients, which I'll talk about first. Book illustration, again, all of this information is in Art Inc., so I go into detail about it there too. Editorial illustration, advertising illustration, and greeting card, novelty, retail product illustration, which I like to call surface design. Things like fabric, stationery, wallpaper, home decor, things like that. Let's talk about personal clients first. So popular examples include invitation illustrations, lettering, blog headers, logos for small businesses, that kind of thing. Like Meg, I hate designing logos. I'm like, I'm an illustrator, not a graphic designer. And they're like, well, we still want you to design our logo. And I have found that logos are often feel like very personal to me. And for some reason, I just don't like doing them. They feel very stressful. So, but a lot of people love doing logos and make their entire business from designing logos for small businesses and personal clients. Great if you like short-term jobs and working with small businesses or individuals. You can find your clients by advertising or garnering blog press. Some people even set up packages on Etsy where you can like buy a logo package and sell those in advance. Book illustration is super popular because it's really fun. Involves creating art for covers, jackets, or interior pages. Sometimes the illustrations are the focus, like in a children's book. That's why children's book illustration is really popular. But a lot of the time, illustration of other people's books are just spot illustrations, and they play a supporting role. Requires a lot of patience, and that's for a few reasons. The process can take a very long time. Not only to concept and create, but also to hit the shelves. And that's because of the length of the printing process, and often printing for some publishers is overseas, so there's like, it has to like literally come from China on a boat. And long-term publication schedules. Like I'm about to start working on a book that will not come out until 2016. And I'll be finished with it by March, but we won't see it for like a really long time, and that's very normal in the publishing world. Some small publishers can turn out books really fast, and if you self-publish, of course, that's also true. But when you work with a bigger publisher, it takes a while. If you're interested in illustrating books, I recommend finding books that you love and that you think are well-designed and beautiful, and look on the back and find out who published it, and write those publishers down, and go to their website and find out if they have submission guidelines. And know, too, that just because you submit your work and you don't hear back right away doesn't mean you will never hear back. Editors keep stockpiles of links to people, even when they don't have time to respond. Editorial illustration, similar to book illustration, but much faster turnaround. If you have ever dreamed of seeing your art in the New York Times or the Washington Post or the New Yorker or a magazine, editorial illustration might be for you. Requires critical thinking, and that's because art directors often will rely on you to interpret a story. So the way it works is you get the story, you get the text for the story, and then they'll say, I want you to illustrate this. Usually you have to turn in a few different roughs or sketches, which I'll talk about in a minute. And they'll choose the one that they like the best. If it's super quick turnaround, they might just have you go straight to final artwork, but that's pretty rare. And most of the time, you're illustrating the story in a way that's not literal. If you open up the New York Times, especially on Sunday, you'll see these gorgeous illustrations by some well-known illustrators, and they illustrate whatever story is in the newspaper, but you always sort of, the objective is for the illustration to make you think and draw you into the story and not give you some literal interpretation. So requires critical thinking, and a lot of people love doing editorial illustration for that reason, because they love thinking outside the box about how something can be illustrated. Same is true for a lot of book illustration too. Unlike book illustration, however, it is often a quick turnaround. Sometimes you need things the next day. Like I was contacted by the Washington Post recently. I was away speaking at a conference, and they needed something the next day, and I wasn't at home, and I didn't have my scanner, and I was like, there's no way I can do this. So I had to turn it down, but that often happens if you get into editorial illustration. You have to be able to take jobs and get them turned in a day or two later. So it can be challenging in that respect, and you have to be able to think on your feet and think really quickly, and also concept. If you're interested, go to your favorite publications, look at the masthead and the websites, and look for art directors and senior designers and email them with your portfolio. Advertising. In the advertising market, your client is usually a large advertising company or a marketing firm who's hired by a corporate client. Rarely do you work directly with the corporate client, although sometimes you can if they have like their own in-house advertising department. This line of work has a reputation for paying well, and that's because advertising is all about making money, unlike publishing. So the flip side is, though, you work with prestigious brands, but how often do you see the illustrator's name on an advertisement? Rarely, if ever, and that's because the advertisement is about the product, not about the illustrator. Okay? In a book, your name's always going to at least go in the inside cover. You may have less creative input than in other, like in editorial. They actually want your creative input. In advertising, they may have already figured out exactly what they want you to draw or render or create for them. That's not always true, but it can be. There's this big book, which used to be the way art directors found illustrators, and it's called Workbook. How many people have seen it before or know what I'm talking about? It still exists. My agent takes, I have an illustration agent, and she takes an ad out in every year and puts me in it, and I do get some jobs that way. Editorial art directors and advertising art directors look at Workbook still. They also, the best way for people to find you is on the internet nowadays, but people still do look at Workbook, and that is one way that if you are really interested in diving into one of these markets, you can take an ad out in that. All right, greeting card, novelty. If you enjoy less conceptual, more decorative illustration work, or dream of having your artwork on journals and wallpaper and fabric, product illustration, surface design, this may be a great fit for you. Often it's called art licensing, although I get commissioned licensing deals a lot. So this is going to overlap with what I'm going to talk about next. Some illustrators spend their entire careers creating surface and pattern designs to adorn apparel, textiles, home decor, paper products, and the like. I do all kinds of illustration, from editorial to book. I've done a couple advertising jobs, and but most of my work is actually in this area. You're often paid in royalties, so you don't necessarily even get an advance up front. But the good news about that is if the product sells really well, even though oftentimes you're making what seems like a small percentage, but if your product sells well, you stand to make a lot of money. If the product doesn't do well, not as much. So taking these kinds of jobs can feel a little risky if they're not paying you a flat fee. If you're serious about breaking into this market, one point of entry is exhibiting at a surface design trade show like PrintSource or Surtex is the biggest, and that one's in New York every year in May. Retail product companies visit these trade shows and look for new talent. While taking out a booth can be expensive, thousands of dollars, you can share a booth with other artists. It also can yield a lot of payback. If you have a company that you'd love to have your products, have your artwork on their products, a publisher like Chronicle, who does both books and gift, or there's a myriad of companies out there. Check their website to find out the art buyer's contact information or if they have submission guidelines. All right, so you've got all these options and you're interested in illustration. I recommend keeping an inspiration board and really if you're at a loss to what kind of work that you might be interested in doing, when you see work that resonates for you from another illustrator or a product line, tear it out, put it on your inspiration board, or if you're on Pinterest, pin it. Make a list of dream projects and clients. I teach a whole other workshop that is about, after you make the list, actually trying to contact those people and make connections. I'm not going to talk about that today, but as Meg was mentioning earlier, like putting yourself out there and just going for it can often lead to rejection or non-response, but can also lead to collaboration. So my fabric line, I'm on my second line of fabric that I've designed, and I have a line of wallpaper. Both happened because I reached out to the companies and said, I want to work with you. So, and if you're a student, how many of you are a student and make like pretend work, or if you're an illustration student and you make like work as like a pretend book cover or a pretend product illustration? Do we have any illustrators in here? Okay. So that is an important practice, actually, to make the work in different categories based on your dream jobs, and to actually put those in your portfolio, because the more robust your portfolio looks, the more, even if it's not work that you were ever commissioned to do, the more you can show what you're capable of in your portfolio, the more likely you are to get hired. I guess we don't have a lot of illustration students in here. All right, when the art director emails, make sure you read the brief. Usually the initial email will contain at least a little bit of information about the job, but never say yes until you have all the information you need, including whether, like what the turnaround time is. Some illustration jobs you have 3 to 6 weeks to complete. Some they need them in 3 days. What's the scope of the work? How many rounds of sketches are they expecting? How many actual illustrations does the job require? What is the pay? I'm not going to get into negotiating fees today, but there's information about it in my book. And I highly, highly, highly recommend, if you are interested in being a commercial artist, a graphic designer, or an illustrator or a photographer, that you buy the Graphic Artist Guild Handbook, Pricing and Ethical Guidelines. It is, there are sample contracts in there. Their guide for fees and billing, like how much to charge. They redo it every couple of years, so it's up to date and current. I know my wife is telling me that you have it in your library. I probably only 1 copy, so you can check it out to see if you like it. First and most important thing to understand in the world of executing an illustration assignment is that rarely is something approved on the first go. So being an illustrator means doing a lot of yes sir and yes ma'am to the client, even when you're exhausted. Things take sometimes 3 to 4 rounds. I always like to say yes more than you say no. Your job, once you've signed up with the client to do an illustration job for them, your job is to execute their vision. Obviously, there are situations when they're asking you to do stuff that's out of the scope or whatever. You can push back, but for the most part, it's your job to make them happy, and sometimes that means staying up all night. Make sure you understand the assignment clearly, and the art director will usually give you more information once you've agreed to the project and more art direction. Sometimes they're really thorough, and sometimes they're not. So make sure you ask as many questions about everything you do not understand, from color choices to style, dimension, on and on and on. Get all the information you need before starting the assignment, even if you feel like you're being an annoying, pestering person who keeps emailing them with more questions. Better to get it right then do all that work and find out you've not done what they wanted you to do. This is a rough or a sketch that I did for a book that I illustrated. It's like an illustrated map. So we always start everything with sketches. They're sometimes referred to as roughs. You don't make the effort to go all the way to final artwork because you want to make sure that the scale of everything in the illustration is approved. Okay? Like, and this was done in pencil, and I like to draw on vellum because it's easy to erase, and I can use the same sketch, or if I need to make a new sketch, I can trace the old one in vellum. So that's how I like to work, because there's usually 2 to 3 rounds of changes. Like, they might come back and say, that bicycle looks way too big against that barn, or whatever. And so you want to be able to go back and revise. And if you work digitally and you have a way to do that digitally, then that's great too. But if you work by hand, usually pencil or pen for sketches. And then once you've got to the final artwork, this ended up being a 2-color or 1-color book, you go to final, and you want to make sure that your final approved sketch is as close to the final artwork as you can get. And if you can't make the deadline, always ask for an extension before, not after. World of art licensing. Oh my God. All right, I'm gonna skip art licensing. Sorry. All right, we're not gonna, for some reason I thought that this was gonna be go a lot faster and I was gonna have time for questions. All right, I'll talk about art licensing really fast. I think we're gonna have to skip the internet part. So licensing, understand that it's commercial. It's your job to make someone else's product beautiful. Build your own brand first. Know who you are. Find your own voice. Own it, love it, put it out there in its purest form. Understand that licensing is just one revenue stream, and it's really important to diversify your income. Read and educate as much as you can about licensing and contracts. Get comfortable with negotiation. Have the right kind of work in your portfolio that is conducive to licensing. And that's a lot of things like florals, nature, celebration occasions, seasons, holidays, inspiration, food, cooking, kitchen, patterns. Think like a product designer, create collections that include things like repeat patterns. If you don't know how to make repeat patterns, learn how to make them. That's a really important skill for, on my blog, by the way, there's a class that I'm recommending about making repeat patterns. You can sign up. Be savvy about your digital skills. Know Photoshop and Illustrator, all of the terms like bleed, CMYK, RGB, resolution. Okay, I'm going to quickly blow through this. Sorry, I didn't time this very well. The internet. We live in an amazing time to be an artist because there are ways to sell your work that I have mentioned already that did not exist until the last decade. And there are ways to promote your work that never existed before. We are in the most exciting time to launch a career as a creative person. So I know it feels overwhelming when you go on the internet and you see all of these people who are trying to launch their art business or their design business or their clothing business on the internet. But there's no reason why any one person can't be successful. I'm going to go a little fast here. I keep a blog. I love blogging because it doesn't alone lead to promotion, but it is a place that is not static like your website gets static, right? It's a place that's ever evolving where you can post images of projects you're working on, shows you're in, new things you're launching, what inspires you, stories about your life, all of that. This is a screenshot from my blog. You can see what it looks like. If you look at my blog, you'll notice I do not have comments. Another great thing about blogging is that you can make it your own and you can do it the way you want to do it. There's also short form blogging like Tumblr, which I think is great. I have lots of different categories on my blog. These are just a few of them. I write about things that are interesting to me, and that draws people. I'm going to skip over this and talk about social media for a second. I'm also going to skip over the part where I explain what Twitter and Facebook and all those things are. This is a screenshot from my blog. It's great on your blog. If you have a place down at the bottom, you'll see the Facebook and Twitter share. Blogs are great things to post on your Facebook fan page or on Twitter that drive people back to your site, and then people can share from your blog and reshare the content and exponentially share what you're doing. This is a screenshot of, I was on Design Sponge's radio show, and she did a podcast with me, and this screenshot from her blog, which I put on my blog with some links, and then other people shared it. I'm going to skip over this. I love Instagram more than anything. More than just almost as much as my blog. I think Twitter and Facebook are awesome for sharing, but what I love about Instagram is that it's a great place for interacting and meeting people, and you would be surprised how many people discover you there and will want to put you in their collection or their show or hire you for this or that. If you don't have an Instagram account, get an Instagram account. So you want to start small. If you're not into social media yet, choose one or two things that you feel comfortable with and go with them. Be responsive. Let people know you're a human being on social media. If people ask questions or pay you compliments, thank them or answer their questions. Stay positive. If you want to complain about your mom or your boyfriend, do it in your personal account, but make sure your professional account, if you have more than one, that you are, engages people and doesn't shut people out, and also shows people that that you're not just there to complain. Not that social media isn't great for complaining. You want to share some of yourself. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I also think Austin Kleon's book, Show Your Work, is an amazing resource. He talks about how showing your process on the internet is really important, and I think social media is a great way. Like if you have a blog and you share what you do, or on Instagram if you share your process, it's a really great way to engage people in what you do and build your audience. People are so interested in knowing artists and designers and makers as people, what drives them, how do they get to that final thing. Don't be afraid to share that. Market, 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 whatever you're doing, art show, sale, launching this, wrapping up that, speaking at this event. Make sure you tell people about it and don't be shy. Celebrate your successes. It's okay to brag a little bit. And strike a balance. While I say all of that, maybe one Facebook post on your fan page a day is enough, and maybe 5 or 6 pictures on Instagram, maybe a few more if you're on vacation in some exotic place. Several tweets a day is great, but you don't want to bombard people with too much, because what will happen if they hit too much of you? They will unfollow you. So make sure you strike a balance. If you're feeling uncomfortable about what you're sharing, you think you might be sharing too much, you probably are. So trust your own sense of balance. Email news blasts are great. Great for especially hitting people who don't spend very much time on social media, who just check their email. Get a good campaign provider. I use MailChimp and I love them. Never add people to your list without their permission. That is a pet peeve of mine. How many people are added to people's lists without signing up? And it drives me crazy, so I don't do it. And as a result, my email list is probably not as long as it could be. Stick to a schedule. Don't send something out just to send something out. Make sure you have something meaningful to say. Somebody asked earlier about advertising. I think what Meg said is true. Taking one advertisement out in one place isn't going to get you very far. You have to saturate. Business cards are great. Carry them with you everywhere, along with promotional. So here's the main message. The effectiveness of your promotions is in relation to your reach. You can't just do one of these things once a week. If you want to start selling your work and gain a following, you have to do a lot of things simultaneously, and it is part of your job of being a full-time entrepreneur or even a part-time entrepreneur, getting to the place where you can be So you want to use different channels simultaneously and consistently to reach a wider and wider audience. Ultimately, you want to be you. So all of the stuff I said about being polite and professional and all of that stuff matters, but ultimately you want to share some of yourself and be yourself and whoever you are, because that's what's going to make people follow you, and it's what's going to make your work resonate for people. Thank you for bearing with this very long presentation. I think I even have 6 minutes for questions. Yes?
How would you compare doing it all this way as opposed to gallery representation?
So the question is how, like the path that I've taken versus gallery representation. I actually was represented by a gallery in San Francisco for a time. They were a gallery that was fine with me doing all of this other stuff. Some galleries like you to be very exclusive. I think the world is changing. It used to be that the fine art world and the commercial world or selling stuff yourself was very separate. And those lines are blurring now. It depends who you work with or what your goals are. If you aspire to be the next, I don't know, my mind is blank right now, but if you aspire to be, a fine artist who is really showing work in high-end galleries and in museums, whether your work is decorative or conceptual or whatever, you should really go for that and stick with that if that is what your goals are. But if you're not as concerned with your work being exclusive and you are just interested in selling your work and building an audience for your work, then obviously I'm going to say diversifying your income and doing lots of different things is the way to go. It really depends what your goals are. Yeah?
In terms of licensing and getting an agent, do you think it's effective to do the licensing without an agent? And what are your thoughts about that?
You absolutely can. I have an agent, and the great thing about having an agent is that they understand licensing contracts. They can tell you if the person that wants to buy or the company that wants to buy your work is trying to screw you over by looking at the contract. They can see all the red flags, and believe me, lots of companies want to screw you over, so you have to be careful. There's lots of great companies out there too who want to pay artists really well. It all depends. So if you don't have an agent, at minimum hire a lawyer, and there are lawyers who specialize in looking at licensing contracts. To look at it, especially if it's something high stakes for you. You don't need an agent. Having an agent is great, especially when it comes to contract negotiation, but contracts are really tricky, and if you get to the point eventually where you really understand the language in them, then you don't necessarily need a lawyer, but when you're first starting out, I highly recommend having somebody with some expertise look at it. It doesn't necessarily need to be a lawyer, but somebody who understands contracts. Yeah.
When you have an original piece of artwork and you want to make reproductions of it, what's the sort of standard for, do you need to let people know that when you're selling that artwork at a show, when it's at a show, that there are copies of it somewhere? Or?
Well, I think it depends. Ultimately it's your right to sell your work however you want, but it depends on your agreement with the gallery. So if you have gallery representation or you're working a show, it's always good to, I would say, just as a courtesy to say, I know my work is in your gallery right now, and I'd really like to make reproductions of this particular painting to sell myself. Maybe I could give you some to sell if you're interested. In that case, you might want to make them limited edition, which increases the value. My book talks a lot about the difference between open edition and limited edition prints. But I always think that giving galleries the benefit of the doubt and communicating with them about what your intentions are and making sure it's okay, because every relationship you enter as an artist, whether it's with a gallery or an agent or a company or a client, is a business relationship, and it's good to be upfront rather than later on have them say, wait a second, what are you doing selling reproductions of this thing where I have the original that I'm trying to sell? Some galleries will not care at all, and they'll say go for it because they don't see it as a threat. Some galleries might actually have great concerns about you doing that. It depends who you are, the popularity of your work, all of that. But I always say ask the questions and be an open communicator. Yes?
Do you have a certain amount of time that you allot per week or month towards packaging and all of the details involved in selling?
Yes. So Wednesday is my shipping day. I used to just sort of, when I was not where I am now in my career, I would get an Etsy order and I was so excited because I got one in 1 week that I'd be like, I'm going to package this and ship it tomorrow. And then slowly, like now I get, during Christmas, I can get up to 80 orders in 1 week. On an average week now, I get about 20 orders. So I have to have 1 day a week that's completely dedicated to packing and shipping. And during busy times, I have somebody who comes and helps me. Yes, so I carve out time. It's the same time every week. I list that on my shop policy page so people know when they can expect to get stuff from me, that they know I ship every Wednesday. So if they order on a Thursday, they're going to have to wait 6 days, for it to ship, things like that.
And what was the name of the service design trade show?
Oh, Print Source and Surtex. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on plagiarism? I guess it's a compliment if someone copies
Yes.
the same.
Yes, and it happened to me, and it happens all of the time. And what I recommend is registering your work with the Copyright Office of the United States government. It is a bit of a time-intensive process, but if someone does copy your work, which ultimately you have no control over, if you put your work on the internet, people can copy it, but at least you have more legal power when you do that. So I think, especially if you're somebody who makes artwork that, that somebody can sort of like remove and plagiarize in some way, it's really important to register it. I mean, technically, you own the rights to your work from the minute it's finished, and you still have legal rights even if it's not plagiarized. I mean, some people are really big with watermarks, and you'll notice if you go on my blog, a lot of my images have copyright Lisa Congdon at the bottom, and that's just my way. That doesn't prevent someone from copying it. What it does is say, this is mine, hands off, So there are different ways to do that, but and different ways to protect yourself. And unfortunately now we're in a time, especially where big companies are taking the work of independent artists and making things out of it. And there's really, artists have no money to sue, so they're very powerless, and it's a very difficult situation. I don't have a lot of answers for it yet. I hope someday we've figured out how to deal with that. One last question, and I think we're done. Yes? I think if it's a reputable publisher, that's not going to happen. I wouldn't worry too much about that. I mean, I think a lot of people worry when they submit things for, that the publisher will then take their idea. But if you have a paper trail of submitting, and you make very clear to the publisher that this is for their eyes only and that it should never be reproduced, that most reputable publishers will abide by that. They would be putting themselves in very dangerous territory if they didn't. Thank you so much, and I'm sorry that I had to rush through that last part.